Hi, it's Christina with the Sisyphean Journal. And again, we have a case that shows that the pre-legalization era was not just self-induced abortions and greasy old men with coat hangers. It was the purview of physicians. In late January of 2004, Stella Murgatroyd lay ailing at the home of her parents, Frank and Sarah, just outside Jacksonville, Illinois. Stella was described as a young woman of unusual capabilities who, in the duties of home and in the church, displayed qualities that indicated decision and lofty purpose. Stella had been a very active member of Ebenezer Church. So this was a young woman whose reputation would have been absolutely shattered by an out-of-wedlock pregnancy. And as we'll see later, her situation was even worse than just an unwed pregnancy. Now, Frank said that Stella had left home on the afternoon of Thursday, January 21st, and had returned at about 5 p.m. The next day, she took ill, and her condition continued to deteriorate. And her father kept asking if he should get a doctor, but Stella kept refusing. Finally, over her objections, he brought in Dr. J.A. Day. And Dr. Day consulted with two other doctors, Norberg and Pittner. The doctors were all very suspicious, so they questioned Stella very pointedly. She made a declaration just before her death on January 30th, witnessed by Norberg and Day. I, Mrs. Stella Murgatroyd, a single lady, 27 years of age, do hereby and in the presence of witnesses solemnly declare that I was pregnant by John Pate, and that on January 21st, 1904, at about 2:30 p.m., Dr. W.C. Manley operated upon me at his office in Jacksonville. And then she exonerated Norbury and Day, saying that they had nothing to do with the abortion. Now, the three doctors who had cared for Stella signed a death certificate giving her cause of death as septic endocarditis and peritonitis, and a postmortem examination verified that she had died from abortion complications. Now, again, the fact that Stella, this very wholesome appearing young church woman, was pregnant outside of marriage would have been shameful enough. What made it even worse for her was that her baby's father, John Pate, was married to Stella's sister Annie. And after Stella's death, John Pate made himself scarce to avoid the police. An inquest was held February 1st through 5th of 1904. During the inquest, Day testified that he'd concluded that Stella was moribund from the first time he saw her. She told him about the abortion and said that Dr. Manley had assured her that there was no danger from the operation. And Day testified that Pate, who had paid him $25 for Stella's care, had named Dr. William C. Manley as Stella's abortionist in a conversation they'd had, which corroborates what Stella said on her deathbed. Pate told Day that Stella had threatened to kill herself unless he was able to arrange an abortion, and I get the feeling that he did not exactly oppose the abortion himself. Day asked Pate if he'd seen Dr. Manley boil the instruments before using them, and Pate had answered in the negative. Pate said that the abortion had been performed at the office that Dr. Manley shared with Dr. Carrill while Carrill was in an adjacent room. When Dr. Day told Pate that he'd have to give a true cause of death on the death certificate, he said Pate tried to convince him not to do so on the grounds that his wife and children would throw him off if they found out the truth. Dr. Norbury testified that after Stella had given her dying declaration, she'd asked him not to show the declaration to her mother, given how much trouble that this would cause in the family. Now, there was other testimony corroborating what both Stella and Pate had said. William Fuller, who was Pate's business partner, testified that Pate was not at their business the afternoon of January 21st when the abortion was committed. He had left their barn at about 11 o'clock in the morning and didn't return until about 4 in the afternoon. Robert de Freitas, who had been one of Stella's classmates, testified that about 2 o'clock on the afternoon of January 21st, he'd encountered Stella outside the building where Carrill had his office, and they spoke briefly before Stella entered the building and headed upstairs toward Carrill's office. And lest there be any doubt as to which of the two second-floor destinations Stella had been heading for, Mrs. George W. Scott, who lived in the apartment across the hall from Carrill's office, testified that Stella had not visited her that day. Pate himself was still at large, and his wife said she disappeared without telling her where he was going. He had withdrawn $200 from the bank and was believed to have boarded a southbound train. But the sheriff was confident he'd be easily found because he had a severely injured eye and a patch of white in his otherwise dark brown hair. But after all of this, evidently the whole case came to nothing. Dr. Manley was arrested, and a warrant was issued for Pate as an accessory. And let me tell you, Frank Murgatroyd harbored no warm feelings toward his son-in-law. One newspaper noted, "He showed plainly that he was in a bitter state of mind toward Pate, and that the latter will be in danger of bodily injury if he ever gets into Murgatroyd's presence unprotected." Now, I've been unable to determine the outcome of the case, but it seems unlikely that either man was convicted because the 1910 federal census shows each man still living with his wife and children in Jacksonville. Evidently, Pate's wife and children did not throw him off after all, and he managed to escape retribution from his father-in-law.